Several years ago, I heard a brilliant comparison between cats and dogs. And some of you have heard this before, just a little different mentality. A dog looks at you and says, wow, you feed me, you groom me, you pet me, you clean up my poop. You must be God. A cat says, oh man, you feed me, you groom me, you pet me, you clean up my poop. I must be God. That's why I hate cats. Actually, have you seen the YouTube video of the hero cat? How many of you have seen that? Oh my goodness, it's unbelievable. It's like totally changed my view of cats. Check this out. This is awesome. Apparently not all cats are evil. Not all cats think that they're God. Several years ago, a guy named Ernest Kurtz wrote what's kind of become the definitive history of the AA movement, Alcoholics Anonymous. And he named his book Not God because he said the fundamental problem alcoholics have is that way down deep, they refuse to acknowledge limitation. They tend to live under the delusion that they are in control of everything, when the truth is they can't even control themselves. And so he writes, fundamental to the recovery process is that healing and sanity begin with a single realization that I am not God. As simple as it sounds, healing begins with a simple realization, I am not in control of my universe. I have weakness and I have limitation. I need help from a power greater than myself. I'm not God. Now this, I'm God syndrome is obviously not limited to alcoholics. You know what was behind the very first sin ever committed? The serpent says to the woman in the Garden of Eden, when you eat this fruit, your eyes will be opened and you will be like what? Like God. It was the very first temptation. You can be the master of your own universe. You don't have to bend the knee. You don't have to surrender to anyone. You don't have to depend on anyone. You don't have to be accountable to anyone. You will be like God. And people have been falling for that one for a long time. And this is the heart of sin, and it's the heart of spiritual confusion. And so now at recovery meetings like AA and so on, they always start with a reminder of spiritual sanity. The first thing that people say when they talk at one of those meetings is something like this. My name is Jason, and I'm an alcoholic. Thank you. And the idea is, just to get clear on who I am, I have weaknesses and limitations. I need help from a power greater than myself. I'm not God. And so here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn to the person next to you real quick this morning and say their name instead of yours, like your name is and whatever their name is, and then say, and you are not God. Just turn to them real quick and say that. Okay, all right. You don't have to argue about it. It's just a real simple statement. Failure to grasp that you are not God can destroy your spiritual life. And this morning, we're going to look at the mind of a man who's about to begin to learn this very painful lesson. This is the second week of this series that we're calling Devotion, where we're walking our way through the book of Daniel. And last week we saw Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, go in and destroy all of Judah, all that was left of the empire of Israel. And he brought back to Babylon Judah's brightest and best, and that included Daniel and his friends. So they were taken as exiles to Babylon, and they were forced to serve Nebuchadnezzar as a part of his court, like his advisors. And this is what they would do in Babylon. They would go and they would destroy another country, but they would bring back the brightest and best. And they would say, they'll add to our country, they'll add to our culture. And so they would bring them back. So that's Daniel and his friends. And we're picking this up in chapter 2 now. So this is Daniel chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. It says, in the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Okay, notice, it's the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. He's been king now for a little over a year. And Assyria, which had been Babylon's chief enemy, completely collapsed 5 years prior to this. So Nebuchadnezzar is absolute dictator of an empire that reigns with unchallenged authority over the known world. Okay, his strength, his wealth, his fame, and his power were unparalleled in the world. Okay, he is a god. That's how people think of him. That's how he thinks of himself. But he finds that he's a god that can't sleep. He's a god with insomnia. He has a troubling dream, and he wants to know what it means. So he calls his advisors together. Verse 4. Then the astrologers answered the king, why do I feel like I'm totally lost? I'm not totally lost. We're good. I know the story, and I feel like this is not going where it should go. Man, okay, verse 4. Then the astrologers answered the king, may the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Now, did you notice how the astrologers addressed the king? You notice that? O king, live forever. Okay, question. How good were his advisors at reminding him that he was not God? Not so good. Be eternal, king. Okay, may you never die. Nebuchadnezzar's narcissistic worldview was only reinforced by the people around him. Now, in our day, a lot of people live under this sort of I'm God delusion, and we have names for it. We say they suffer from, a Messiah complex, or they suffer from delusions of grandeur. Nebuchadnezzar sees the world as revolving around him. He has a dream, and he's troubled by it. And he demands that his top advisors interpret it for him. And we're about to see another characteristic of this I'm God syndrome, another attribute that often comes with it. People who study human development sometimes evaluate emotional maturity based on something that they like to call frustration tolerance. Okay? They say that highly mature people exhibit high frustration tolerance. They're able to exercise patience and delayed gratification. Immaturity, on the other hand, is marked by low frustration tolerance. Okay? I can't stand it if I don't get my way immediately. So check out how Nebuchadnezzar deals with his frustration, verses 5 to 13. The king replied to the astrologers, this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Once more they replied, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. Okay, nobody is able to magically tell him his dream. So he decides to have all of his advisors executed. How would you assess his frustration tolerance? Would you say it's high or low? Yeah, it's low. Executing people because they can't read your mind, that's low frustration tolerance. Here's this guy with the full-blown I'm God syndrome. He wants to control everything. He submits to no one. He feels entitled to have everything go his way. In fact, he must have things go his way or everybody around him is going to have hell to pay. And here's the thing. We're going to see a great contrast in this story. We see this king who has it all. He has power and wealth and fame and prestige. He has it all, but he's haunted by these uncontrollable emotions. And yet we're about to see Daniel, a man who, by human standards, has lost everything. And we talked about this last week. He's a guy who's been tossed around like a boat on the sea. And he has no delusions about being the master of his own universe. Daniel has no delusions about being God, but he has this unshakable faith. Daniel is sitting around and he's minding his own business one day, and suddenly a commander shows up to put Daniel and his friends to death. Why? Because they're grouped in with all of the wise men of Babylon that can't solve the dream. And so look at how Daniel reacts, verses 13 to 18, and we're repeating verse 13. But verses 13 to 18. It says, so the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So Daniel hears the news, and he says, holy cow, that's insane. We're all going to die, right? Not so much. He hears the news, and he says, whoa, we got to pray. And he organizes like this all-night prayer vigil with his friends. Now contrast that with the reaction of the other wise men in Babylon. They hear the request of Nebuchadnezzar, okay, tell me my dream and interpret it or you're all dead. And they say, we're hosed. We're doomed. Because this is impossible. Look again at verses 10 and 11. The astrologers answered the king, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing from any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. These advisors, they're not atheists. They believe in a spiritual realm, but they do not believe in a God that's good and powerful and present, a God that sees them and cares about them and is at work. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. And this is the great issue. Does God live among human beings? Does he know what's happening with me? Does he care about me? Or is everything in my world up to me? And I'll tell you, there was kind of an ouch factor for me as I wrestled with this week. Because, you may know this, but I'm a follower of Jesus. I believe in a good God. I believe that God can and does intervene on earth, and yet I constantly forget. I live as if it's all up to me a lot of the time. Problem enters my life, And instead of going to God, I just worry. Because I feel like, okay, I have to solve this. I have to fix it. This delusion that I'm ultimately in control, like that all of the outcomes depend on me, that it all rests on me. And so can I just pause here for a reality check? There's so much more sanity when we acknowledge our limitations. And so let me remind you of some of the stuff that we can't control, okay? We can't control our boss. Can't control our spouse. We can't control the economy. We can't control traffic. We can't control the decisions our kids make. We can't even control our own health, ultimately. Here's a deeply sobering reality. We're all just one bad doctor's report or one bad driver away from life taking a drastic turn. As much as we like to think that we're in control, we're not. None of us are ultimately the master of our own universe. Now, Daniel was painfully aware of that reality. He'd been stripped of everything. He'd lost virtually everything that mattered to him. But down deep, his feet were planted on this solid foundation. That God is real, that God is good, and that God is at work. And this belief sustained him. It filled him with humility and confidence. It enabled him to handle with this unshakable poise situations that wrecked pretty much everybody else. Verses 19 to 25. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes time and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king." Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him." Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, "I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what the dream means." Arioch takes Daniel to the king, and he says, "I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." Whew. Arioch is engaged here in what we might call spin control. If you remember, Arioch was pretty content to just go out and kill them all. It was Daniel that stepped up and said, "Okay, wait, God might do something. Don't kill everyone yet." It was Daniel that took all of the initiative in all of this. But because Arioch wants to look good in front of Nebuchadnezzar now, he says, "I have found a man from among the exiles." And the flavor of what he's saying is like, it wasn't easy, O king, but I did the impossible. I found a guy that can help you. I searched high and low. I even combed through the obscure ranks of these exiles. I mean, who else would think of that, king? And I found what you need. I'm your guy. Now contrast that with Daniel's humility, verses 26 to 30. The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. Before Daniel tells him the dream in detail, he refuses to take any of the credit for all of this. He's like, let me tell you right up front, I'm not that smart. Let me tell you right up front, okay, this is a God thing. On top of that, we see kind of another interesting detail a little later in the story, down in verse 36, and we'll get there in a minute. But Daniel goes on to describe the dream, and we'll get there. But before he starts the interpretation of it, he says this in verse 36. He says, this was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Question. Why does he say we? I mean, like, he's the one standing there in front of Nebuchadnezzar. Why say we will interpret the dream? Well, almost certainly, Daniel is including his friends here. His friends that gathered when this challenge arose. His friends who prayed all through the night for God to move. Daniel received from God the dream and the interpretation, but his praying friends deserve just as much of the credit as far as he's concerned. So Daniel says, and now we will interpret the dream. And I love this little detail. He wants his friends in on the credit. And I'll tell you, I admire that aspect of Daniel's humility. It comes directly out of his acknowledgement of his limitations. And I would love to learn to be more like that. You know why? Because I'm drawn to people that are like that. I like being around people that are like that. It's who I want to be. And if I'm real clear that I'm not God, then I can kind of let go of self-promotion. I don't have to be obsessed with image management. Like Daniel doesn't have to promote himself. He trusts that God sees, that God knows. And his quiet humility and yet confidence, like blended together, they're awesome. And now Daniel interprets the dream. And check out how detailed he gets with it. Verses 31 to 35. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, and the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. So you have to imagine Daniel's in this room, and the other advisors are in the room. And they're looking at the king like, is this the dream? Is Daniel right? Or are we all going to die? Like every eye is firmly on Nebuchadnezzar, who smiles and he nods and he motions to Daniel. He's like, yeah, that's right. And he's motioning, he's like, carry on. And so Daniel continues, verses 36 to 38. This was the dream. And now we will interpret it to the king. Your majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind, and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. Look at how Daniel emphasizes the extent of Nebuchadnezzar's power. It's It's pretty awesome. Nebuchadnezzar is not just the ruler over human kingdoms, okay? He's not just a king over kings. He's a king over beasts of the field, over the birds of the air. Okay, he's a ruler with like absolute authority in his kingdom. And we don't talk about presidents like that, do we? I mean, imagine someone describing Obama as the ruler over the beasts of the field. We've never had a man who's president over beasts and birds. But Nebuchadnezzar is ruler over all people and over every creature. And from Nebuchadnezzar's perspective, you have to imagine the interpretation of this is going pretty good so far. But Daniel keeps going, verses 39 to 45. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united, any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. So Daniel prophesies that after Nebuchadnezzar, human kingdoms will come and they will go. And one day, in the middle of the rise and fall of these dynasties, an entirely different kind of kingdom will emerge. This is a vision of the kingdom of God breaking into human history. A kingdom not of human origin, a kingdom that will last forever. As all human kingdoms will eventually blow away like chaff, this final kingdom will outlast them all. It will be eternal. And Daniel here is prophesying what would be like the hinge of human history. He wouldn't live to see it. Neither would centuries of people to follow him. And they would wonder, will what Daniel prophesied ever come true? And then one day, a no-name carpenter from an obscure town began an itinerant ministry saying, "Repent, for the kingdom of God is now at hand." And people trembled when they heard those words. This is what the world had been waiting for. Jesus was the rock, not cut by human hands. I mean, look again at the vivid imagery of verses 44 and 45. I think this is awesome. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. Jesus would come. And human kingdoms would rise and they would fall. And Jesus would begin a movement based on love, not on violence, based on love. And that movement would endure. And it has endured. And here we are gathering today, 2,000 years later, joining billions of other people all over the planet. And we all gather to honor and serve a different kind of king. A king that transcends human empires, a king of all nations. He came as a nobody in the midst of these incredible empires. And he started a movement, a kingdom that will never die. Like between Daniel and you and me, there have been many kingdoms, many empires. The Persian Empire, unbelievable, but it came and it went. The Greek Empire came and it went. The Roman Empire came and it went. And the truth is, many, many human kingdoms have come and they've gone. And sometimes people get real concerned about which empire is which. Like which human kingdom is this, does it mean when it's talking about the silver? Which one is the bronze? Which one is the iron? Okay, that really isn't the point. We aren't ever told in Scripture, and it really isn't the point. The point is there's a king, and he's come. And he started something real and something powerful and something beautiful. A different kind of kingdom has begun, and it will endure forever. He's the King of Kings. Okay, he is the Lord of Lords, the rock cut out of a mountain, not by human hands. Now here's what I find like crazy ironic about all of this and how it all came about. This vision didn't come to a king in Israel. This dream didn't come to like David. It didn't come to Solomon or one of the other devout prophets of Israel. The dream came to a Babylonian king. And think about that. A king that had destroyed what was left of Israel. A king that didn't fear God or worship him. A king that worshiped his own Babylonian gods. A king that, in a way, was convinced that he was God. That's who God chose to reveal this dream. And I want to explain something that's kind of technical that I think is amazing in the story. Back in verse 4 of this chapter, the language changes. If you have a Bible with you, you could kind of look at this. There should be a little footnote by verse 4. And the language changes, it tells us, from Hebrew to Aramaic. Okay? So from chapter 4, verse 2, all the way through chapter 7, the book of Daniel, when it was originally written, was written in Aramaic. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go like all seminary professor on you. But this is a very significant thing. And it's very unusual. Because almost the entire Old Testament is written in Hebrew. Okay, it's written in the language of the people of Israel. But for these few chapters, it switches right in the middle of the story to a different language. It switches to Aramaic. Okay, that's weird. I mean, how often do you pick up a book written in English and you get to chapter 2 and it switches to like Italian or French? It just doesn't happen. It wouldn't sell very much if it did. And so we look at them and we go, why did the writer do this? And I'll tell you what I think. Here's what I think. Aramaic was the most common language of the Middle Eastern world at that time. Okay, it's a little bit like English is the most common language in most parts of the Western world these days. And it's like the writer was signaling that now God is not just the God of one tribe. He's not just the God of one country, of one language, of one tongue. But he's the God of the whole world. Like sometimes we can think that we're the first society that's ever had to deal with like multiculturalism and diversity. Okay, it's everywhere in the book of Daniel. Another detail that kind of sticks out, and I won't take time to read all the verses, but if you look at verse 18, 28, 37, and 44, there's a name for God that's used over and over. It's the phrase, the God of heaven. Daniel refers to him as the God of heaven. Now that's interesting because it's a phrase that's very rarely used anywhere else in the Old Testament. Usually in the Old Testament scriptures, they used the standard Hebrew names for God. They either used Yahweh or Elohim. But Daniel wants to make it very clear to Nebuchadnezzar that this God is not just Israel's God. Because Nebuchadnezzar is used to other countries thinking that they have their gods and Babylon has its gods. Okay? This is not, and Daniel's pointing out, this is not one God among many. This is Nebuchadnezzar, O king, this is the God of the whole earth. Okay, this is the God of heaven. He's the Lord of Babylon as well as Israel. He's the Lord over Nebuchadnezzar as well as Daniel, whether Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges it or not. He's the Lord of Jerusalem. He's the Lord of Rome. He's the Lord of New York. He's the Lord of Seattle. He's the Lord of Everett and Linwood and Mount Lake Terrace and Mukilteo and your neighborhood and my neighborhood. He's the Lord of wherever you are and whoever you're with. He's the Lord of your mom. He's the Lord of your dad. He's the Lord of your friends and of your coworkers. He's the Lord of your boss. He loves them, and he's over them, whether they know it or not. And in this dramatic scene, Daniel is trying to help Nebuchadnezzar respond to God. He's introducing Nebuchadnezzar to the God of heaven. And he's brilliant in how he goes about it. He gives Nebuchadnezzar the good news first. He says, you're the head of gold. Okay, that's the good news. But then he gets to the hard truth. It says the statue has feet of clay, and one day it's coming down. Nebuchadnezzar, there is a God, the God of heaven, and he rules all of it. You are not God. Now, you got to feel the drama of this moment. Because here's Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful man in the world, who could, without batting an eye, kill Daniel if he's offended in the slightest. And Daniel says, Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to die. And your kingdom is going to be swept away without a trace. You are not God. But the God of heaven has given you this kingdom. And he's given you this dream. And he's given you this interpretation. He's real, and he's good, and he's involved in your life. And look at how Nebuchadnezzar reacts. This is extraordinary. Verses 46 and 47. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. I mean, this is the most amazing thing. Nebuchadnezzar begins to open his heart to the God of heaven. Now, is he a full-fledged believer at this point? Not likely. And we will see in the coming weeks, he still engages in idol worship and oppressive violence. But Daniel doesn't give up on him because he knows the God of heaven is at work, even on Nebuchadnezzar. And people's spiritual journeys are rarely, maybe you've noticed this, they're rarely just straight up the ladder. Usually it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So Daniel refuses to give up on Nebuchadnezzar. He wants him to know the truth about God, the truth about himself. He wants him to find the freedom that Daniel knows. He wants him to see the heart of God and respond to it. And this is the natural result of being really clear about who God is. Daniel knew that he ultimately controlled nothing. He was so in touch with his limitations and his weakness. But he was also in touch with God's strength. He trusted in God's heart and God's power. It had become very, very real to him, and he wanted it to become real for this king. Now, I was working on this message this last week, and I was deeply struck as I was thinking through this stuff with Nebuchadnezzar. My cousin got married last night down in Seattle. And so my dad and his wife, my stepmom, came up from California to go to the wedding. And so we saw them last night, and we'll see them for the next couple of days. My biological mom and my dad divorced when I was a baby. And so as a kid, I rarely saw my dad. He moved to California when I was an infant. And he and I were never close. In fact, I don't even call him Dad. I call him by his name, Gene. But over the last several years, he and I have become friends. And he's done a really good job of of reaching out to me and being involved in my life. And he loves my kids, and he loves my wife, and I'm really thankful. But my dad, and many of you know this, is not a Christ follower. He's a kind man. He's a good man. But he has shown absolutely no interest in God at all. In fact, when the subject comes up, he gets angry. And he kind of shuts down and he kind of shuts off. And so I have to be careful. And it hit me this week as I was thinking about this story. It hit me that over the years, I've sort of given up on the idea of my dad ever coming to love God. You know, I mean, I would never say that except to a few close friends. But down deep, I realized for a long time I've had very little hope that could ever happen. Because like he doesn't have anyone in his life other than Jen and I that would ever point him to God. You know, he's surrounded himself with people that think like he does. And he's not been very open when he's been with us, when we've sort of talked about stuff. And so it's been really easy for me to just kind of give up. And it hit me this week that years ago, I used to pray for my dad like crazy. I used to look for every opportunity to have spiritual conversations. But as the years have gone by and I've seen no movement with him, it hit me that I've kind of cooled off. But it also hit me this week that deep down, I really do believe that God is real, that God is good, and that he loves my dad, and that he's longing for my dad to be able to see him, for my dad to reach out to him and to start responding to God. And I was thinking about it, and I thought, man, what if that happened? Like, what if my dad did that? What if he could somehow see the goodness of God? If he could, like, let go of all of the junk in his life, you know, it would be so beautiful. It really would be more beautiful probably than anything I can even imagine. His heart would be healed, and the gifts that God has given to him. My dad's he's a brilliant guy. He's been a very successful attorney for a long time. And the gifts that God has given him could be leveraged for so much good. And so as I was working through this story with Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, it just hit me that when it comes to my dad, I've been approaching sort of the whole thing like I'm God. Like the weight of the whole thing somehow is on me. Like really it's all up to me. It's about me saying the right thing at the right time, coming up with the right words and convincing him of something. And if I'm not skilled enough, and if I'm not smart enough, and if I'm not spiritual enough, then nothing will be able to break through to my dad. And I've sat around for the last few years going, you know what, I'm not enough. But when I think about Nebuchadnezzar responding to God, and when I think about the reality of that, I go, you know what, there's hope. My dad has insulated himself from people that love God. Like his entire circle of people are all people that reject God. But he hasn't done any more of that. He's done any more isolated than Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, he had this team of advisors that other than the guys from Judah who he didn't really talk to on a regular basis, none of them loved God. They all worshiped other gods, the Babylonian gods. And they would come in and treat him and talk to him as if he was a god. And yet, God broke through all of that and reached out to him. God was at work in ways that no one would have predicted. You think about it, like the dream of the kingdom of God breaking into the world was actually given to Nebuchadnezzar. It was given to that guy. And then God put Daniel there to help him walk through it. And this is like just the beginning of their relationship. There's going to be a whole lot more ups and downs for Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. But God isn't done yet. He's moving. He's moving in Babylon. He's moving in Nebuchadnezzar. And guys, he's still moving. He's still moving. And the truth is, most of us have people that we love. People that we know, we watch, it's so painful because they're running from God at the moment. Maybe for you it's a mom or a dad or a brother or a sister or a friend or a child. And here's why you and I need to hang in there. Because God isn't done yet. He's not done. And so we have to keep watching. We have to keep watching and praying and being available. I just want to close with one final thought. Daniel had this amazing clarity about the reality of God. He refused to put all of the weight of everything that was going on his own shoulders. He held this belief that freed him to live with humility and confidence. And it kind of went like this. In heaven is this great big God. An infinite God so big that watching over this planet is no trouble for him at all. He never has a sleep problem. He's never troubled by anxious thoughts or bad dreams. And not only that, but this God whose kingdom will one day come to earth, Daniel would say, has a direct relationship with me. I'm not God. I'm just one of many. I'm not God, but I am God's friend. I'm God's child. And therefore, it doesn't matter if I'm just a lowly political prisoner and this king is the most powerful man on the face of the planet. I don't have to promote myself. I don't have to make sure I get credit for lots of stuff. God knows. God sees. There is a God in heaven, but he's not just in heaven. He's right here.